Yann tel is here. His parents were Canadian diplomats. He was born in Spain and has lived all over the world. It was while traveling in India that he came upon the idea for his most recent novel, Life of Pi. The book tells the story of an Indian teenager who is shipwrecked with a Bengal tiger named Richard Parker. In October, tel was awarded the Man Booker Prize for fiction for Life of Pi. I'm pleased to have him here at this table for the first time. And what a great picture. I mean, 277 days on the ocean, and there is the picture we get of the two of them together. A life of coexistence, huh? Just the idea for this, you know, where did it come from?
That's a complicated story. 12 years ago, I read a review. I thought it was it's an American paper, I think it was the New York Times, and I thought it was John Updike. It wasn't John Updike. Anyway, it was a review of a Brazilian novel. And I remember the review being lukewarm, but I liked the premise. It sizzled in my mind. It was about a person in life, but with a wild animal. I said, I could do something with that. I tried to find the book in Montreal, couldn't find it, forgot about it. 7 years later, as you said, I was in India. And India is a place with a lot of animals and a lot of religions. And those two came together for me, that curious mixture of zoology and theology. So I decided to tell my own story with that premise.
But did somebody come up to you and say, tell a story about God?
No, there's a lot. Yeah, in the author's note, I say, I have a story that will make you believe in God. No, what happened is I met this wonderfully ecumenical Hindu, an old gentleman who had that. Hindus at their best are open to anything that works spiritually. If they meet Jesus Christ, they'll welcome him the way they'd welcome Vishnu or Krishna. So I met this wonderfully ecumenical Hindu gentleman who struck me precisely because of his great openness to all matters spiritual. And so, but the line is mine, but there was something about his demeanor that made me think of that, of having stories that make people believe in God.
So you have this story of a tiger and a young man on a boat. You're in India, you know. Did it come to you in a rush of what you had to do?
Yeah, it was one of those wonderful instances where the whole novel came together and I had this grand vision of it. And then the next 4 years I spent putting on paper that vision that I had. In about an hour, I'd say. I was in Munnar, which is a hill station near Bombay. And as I said, everything came together, the two stories, the many animals. It took me a little while to get to the tiger. Initially, the tiger was going to be an elephant, but that was too comical.
Yeah.
And then I thought of a rhinoceros. And for the longest time, it was going to be a rhinoceros. And the problem with that is that rhinos are herbivores. They only eat grass. And I couldn't see how I could have a herbivore survive 227 days at sea. So I finally switched to a carnivore. But every other detail fell into place, every other detail of the novel.
But you spent 2 years researching it. I mean,
Well, I did research on religion. I read the foundational texts of Hinduism, Christianity, and Islam. We should mention that Pi practices 3 religions. He's a practicing Muslim, Hindu, and Christian. So I read the foundational texts
of those. He loves God in all forms.
Exactly. So I read the foundational texts. I read secondary texts about the religions. I read on zoo biology, animal psychology, castaway stories. But, you know, I took 2 years in part because it was so interesting doing that kind of research. You studied animals. You studied the animal kingdom. You went to zoos all over India. Yeah, exactly. I did practical research in India for 6 months, going not only to zoos but also temples, mosques, churches, soaking up Indianness.
The religious stuff. Why is that so crucial here?
Well, because I chose to make it crucial. I wanted to look at religion. My background is completely secular. But it left me at one point dissatisfied, in part because any secular ideology doesn't leave you any tools, really, to deal with evil. Karl Marx has nothing to say about evil, about how to live with evil, nor does Adam Smith. Shakespeare never saved a soul. I was looking for something that would give me a perspective on evil. So I thought I'd look at religion. What does religion have to offer? What does faith have to offer? And I didn't want to look at it from one single perspective, which is why I have Pi practice 3 religions. I wanted to relativize organized religion, get to the core of these religions, which is faith. And also it allowed me to introduce an element of humor, which isn't very frequent in matters of religion.
In this introductory note, you say it's a novel in which will make you believe in God or ask yourself, why not? But the ending, which I can't disclose here because it'll ruin it for people who are going to read it, doesn't necessarily have that conclusion about God, or asking yourself why you don't.
Yeah.
I mean, you've thought about this before.
Oh yes. One of the things I liked about my own novel was this idea of throwing this great gauntlet down of I have a story that'll make you believe in God.
Or ask yourself, why not?
Yeah, but then spend the vast majority of the novel not talking about religion at all.
Right.
In the whole Pacific segment, Pi occasionally describes certain religious ceremonies, you know, praying towards Mecca, not knowing where Mecca is, celebrating Mass without consecrated hosts. But there's no talk of religion. And then suddenly at the very end, when there's this whenever a ship sinks, it's like when a plane crashes, there's an investigation.
Right.
So Pi is interrogated by two Japanese interrogators, and they don't believe his story.
Right.
So maybe, wait, should I reveal too much?
Yeah,
here?
I know. Let's don't, because I mean,
okay.
Basically, Pi has to reveal a story, and so he has to have an alternative story.
Yes.
And so either you'll believe his story, or you can try this one.
Exactly.
And one is much more believable than the other.
Right. And the point of that is that there is a theological dimension to storytelling. All religions tell stories, which is interesting. It's not like all religions, like countries have constitutions. There's no narration.
Right.
There's no narration to constitutions.
Religions have stories.
Have stories. And why is that? Why aren't they just simple, you know, why isn't all religion just 10 commandments? No, there's a lot more to that. There are stories.
That's a great question. What's the answer?
Well, I think it is because stories involve imagination. And how we take reality involves imagination. There's a scene in the novel where two characters are looking at a zebra. They're looking at the same animal.
Soon to be gone zebra.
One man is a scientific man and says, Equus burchelli boemi, which is the scientific name for that species of zebra, grand zebra. The other man, who's a Muslim, says, Allahu Akbar, God is great. He's moved by the beauty of it. So they're looking at the same reality, coming to different conclusions. Now, why is that? Why don't we all say the same story about reality? Why? Because we involve our imagination in reality. And depending on what we bring to it, we get a different interpretation of reality. Reality isn't just out there, it's an interpretation. And I argue that if you have a choice of interpretations, if you have a choice of stories, you might as well choose the better story.
What is it you think about this book that so resonates with critics? A simple story.
I think in a sense it's the oddity of it. You know, it's this mixture of theology and religion, which is kind of odd. Also, it's a grand adventure story.
Yeah. Story of survival, a story of endurance, a story of pain, a story of relationships.
But at the same, and so it seems fairly simple, a straightforward adventure story, and yet you realize at the end, oh, there's a lot more depth here than I realized. Yeah. And one thing that I've liked, the most flattering thing I think you can say of a book, is, you know, I finished it and then I immediately started rereading it. And I've had a number of people who said that they finished it and they immediately started rereading part one.
Yeah.
Because they suddenly realize, oh, there's a lot more here than I realized. Without it being a tricky novel. I mean, this is another thing, too, is that it's, I think one of the reasons it was such a popular Booker winner is that while being, in some levels, very complex, it's very, very simple. It's a very accessible novel.
Well, you have made statements in a number of instances in which you said that's the way you want to write.
Yeah.
You're not interested in being dense. And you even suggest there's some writers that we all know who you think are difficult to comprehend and therefore not very attractive to you.
Yeah, I mean, I like sometimes complex books. I mean, one of my favorite books is Dante's Inferno.
Yeah.
The Divine Comedy is extraordinary. But in my own style, yes, I like simplicity. I think you can go deep with simplicity. To be honest, it could also be a reflection of my limitations, too.
Well, no, but there's nothing more simple than a tiger and a 16-year-old kid, Indian boy on a boat.
It's precisely limits that can sometimes release us. You know, by being limited, that we're forced to try to get beyond those borders. You know, there's that great line, is it Chris Christopherson, freedom is nothing else to do.
It is Chris Christopherson, yes.
Yeah, nothing else to do. It's from Leibniz, actually, originally. But so if you're
it's
limited...
From whom? I've never known
Leibniz.
Is that right?
Yeah, Chris Christopherson was a Rhodes Scholar.
I knew that,
yeah. And he studied Leibniz, and anyway.
His favorite poet was Blake.
Yeah, it's precisely by being limited, I think, that it forces us to try to escape those limitations.
You have said that you only have 2 books in you. Did you really mean that?
Well, I had 3 when I started Pi. I don't believe in art as a career. I mean...
You don't?
Well, it's not a career. I mean, you have to be inspired. And you can't be inspired on command. And I think unless you're a real genius like Tolstoy, there's only so many stories you have in you. So when I started Pi, I said, okay, I have 3 more stories. Oddly enough, they all deal with animals. I'm sure I'll be pigeonholed as the guy who writes...
Well, you just said that the next one about evil is going to be about animals.
Yeah, and the one after that, too.
What's the one after that about?
Well, that's too complicated. But the animal in question is a chimp. 3 chimps, 3 chimpanzees.
Now, what is this thing you have about animals?
Well, I don't really have anything for animals, actually. They just suit my purpose. I mean, for example, in this novel, they're real animals, right? Richard
Right.
Parker's a
Right.
real tiger. They're all
Richard Parker's the tiger's name.
yeah, sorry, the tiger. In the next one, with this monkey and the donkey, they're completely anthropomorphized.
Yeah.
So they allow me to talk, as I said, indirectly, but something that's difficult to talk about directly. In the third one, I'm looking at the nature of Christianity. I'm more specifically zeroing on Christianity, the nature of Christ, and I'm using a chimpanzee as a means of investigating the nature of Christ, the Christ event.
Yeah. Pi says that the animals are, you should make this point, Pi's parents have a zoo.
Yeah, they're zookeepers in
They're
Pondicherry,
zookeepers
in India.
In Pondicherry.
Yeah.
And Pi says that all the animals are an extension of the family. I mean, he has a great reverence for them.
Yeah. Well, as I said, we're relational animals. The more you know about an animal, just as the more you know about someone, the more you understand them. And I mean, zoos have a tough job because it's politically incorrect to like zoos, which is a real pity because people tend to go to zoos and just say, oh, aren't they pretty? Just look at the color of the giraffes. And if you know a bit more about the behavior, if you go at sunrise or at sunset when they really are more active, it's fascinating to watch them. You can really watch an animal for a full hour and just interested in what it does, how it's related
Well,
to
did
its
you do that
environment.
about the tiger? Is that part of what
Yeah,
you
yeah.
did to get a feeling for
I did
Richard Parker?
I did a lot of research in India and just theoretical research, reading books and then going to zoos and
Just
observing.
standing there and watching.
Yeah, exactly.
And what did you see about the tiger?
Well, fundamentally, I think animals are mystery with a capital M.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we tend to project so much on animals, because we look at something and we see it's alive, it's animate, it obviously has some form of consciousness, but it's not like us, and that's very puzzling. And because it's puzzling, we project onto it to sort of map over that mystery. But fundamentally, if we strip away at anthropomorphizing, at the anthropomorphism of animals, if we strip that away and just look at what we see, I think we're puzzled. We see mystery, and that frightens us.
Writing was not easy or automatic for you. I mean, you had some tough times before you...
Yeah, I got to Pi. Well, that's
Got
why I
to Pi.
said I don't think of life as art as a career. I wrote 2 other books that did well critically,
Right.
but didn't meet their readers.
Didn't meet their readers, that's a nice term. They
Yeah.
never met their reader.
Yeah, and then when I was in
sat
India, when I was in India, I meant to work on another novel. In fact, the one that I mentioned, this Portuguese
Right.
novel, and it just didn't come alive in my mind. And so I was desperately looking for a story. And when I say story, I don't just mean story with a small s, I mean with a capital S. Some sort of, as I said religion has a theological, I mean, storytelling has a theological dimension. I was looking for a story that would somehow make sense of the circumstances I was in.
Somebody's going to be listening to this. I mean, this is a book that won the Booker Prize, so obviously some serious people think it's a great book, and it's selling well, so some readers think it's a good read. There are people who are going to listen to this story, and when I show them this, I'm going to say, 277 days at sea. That's a long time. The Old Man in the Sea was, what, 3 days?
Well, I can't remember
Something, about 3 days, I think. Okay, this is they're going to say, what can happen to compel my attention? And the critics make this point, too. It's just when they think you're getting too into it, and all of a sudden it becomes, there's a humor to it, you know. Give me a sense of what it is you are able to do in this relationship that's so compelling.
Well, listen, the interesting thing about castaway stories is that despite the fact that they take place in the great open seas, in fact they're domestic dramas. I mean, you're confined to a small space.
Right.
So it's a domestic drama. It's nearly a bourgeois drama,
Yeah.
the castaway story. So just as there's much to do in a house, in a relationship, there's much to do in a castaway, in your little lifeboat. So there's many details of survival. You know, Pi is obsessed with knots that keep his raft together.
Right.
He has to find food. He has to find water. He has to learn how to tame, to some extent, Richard Parker. He must deal with the animal life of the Pacific, whether it's fish, whales, dolphins, sharks. At one point I say that the sea is a city.
Exactly.
Now, it's true.
With subways, with all kinds of things
Yeah.
passing and specks and...
Yeah, the sea is a busy place. It's not this vast void of water. And so there's much dealing with the various things that can happen in the Pacific Ocean.
There is this, too, you have to do in this book. You have to, at every turn, because Pi knows this, Richard Parker would eat him in a second. There is that overwhelming, as you say, these opposites, boredom and terror. He knows that Richard Parker is totally capable. And he's seen it happen on the boat. And you got to keep that alive. at every page, because it just has to hang there.
Yeah, that's a point we should make, that it is a real tiger. It's not, it's not out of Walt Disney.
This is not an imagination either.
No, this is a real 450-pound
Bengal tiger.
Wild Bengal tiger. And yet, because Pi knows animals, he understands its mind. So, for example, animals are territorial. That's one misconception people have about zoos. They get the impression if you open a cage, the animal will bound out. It's not true. If it's a good zoo and that animal has appropriated that territory in the way it would in the wild, that zoo territory is its own territory. It's familiar. It knows how it works. It knows where to hide. And so it's a territory it is familiar with and therefore will not seek to escape it. And in fact, if you invade it, it will attack you precisely because you're invading its territory.
Life of Pi novel, Yann tel, Booker Prize winner, extraordinary tale. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you here.
Same here.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time. Yann tel is here. His parents were Canadian diplomats. He was born in Spain and has lived all over the world. It was while traveling in India that he came upon the idea for his most recent novel, Life of Pi. The book tells the story of an Indian teenager who is shipwrecked with a Bengal tiger named Richard Parker. In October, Martel was awarded the Man Booker Prize for Fiction for Life of Pi. I'm pleased to have him here at this table for the first time. And what a great picture. I mean, 277 days. Yeah. Tell a story about God?
No, there's a lot. Yeah, in the author's note, I say, I have a story that will make you believe in God. No, what happened is I met this wonderfully ecumenical Hindu, an old gentleman who had that. Hindus at their best are open to anything that works spiritually. If they meet Jesus Christ, they'll welcome them the way they'd welcome Vishnu or Krishna. So I met this wonderfully ecumenical Hindu gentleman who struck me precisely because of his great openness to all matters spiritual. And so, but the line is mine, but there's something about his demeanor that made me think of that, of having stories that make people believe in God.
So you have this story of a tiger and a young man on a boat. You're in India, you know. Did it come to you in a rush of what you had to do?
Yeah, it was one of those wonderful instances where the whole novel came together and I had this grand vision of it. And then the next 4 years I remember the review being lukewarm, but I liked the premise. It sizzled in my mind. It was about a person in a lifeboat with a wild animal. I said, I could do something with that. I tried to find the book in Montreal, couldn't find it, forgot about it. 7 years later, as you said, I was in India. And India is a place with a lot of animals and a lot of religions. And those two came together for me, that curious mixture of zoology and theology. So I decided to tell my own story with that premise.
But did somebody come up to you and say, on the ocean, and there is the picture we get of the two of them together, a life of coexistence, huh? Just the idea for this, you know, where did it come from?
That's a complicated story. 12 years ago I read a review. I thought it was it's an American paper, I think it was the New York Times, and I thought it was John Updike. It wasn't John Updike. Anyway, it was a review of a Brazilian novel.